through the distance learning program in the spring of 2017. He is also one of our Reformed worship bloggers and enjoys a wide array of music styles and genres, and has had opportunity to talk about worship from a Reformed perspective in schools, prisons, and churches in both Canada and the United States. So at this time, we would like to turn it over to Josh. And Josh, if you can share your screen at this time, we will let you take it away.
Sounds good. I am just going to get this presentation started here. And is that looking good there, Diane?
It looks good. You betcha.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you and Worship Ministries for this opportunity to share something that has become increasingly important to me in my service to the church. And so I just actually want to start with a story from Fred Craddock. As many of you may know, he's a fantastic preacher, and he's got a way of just putting things into context for us. So let me start with this Craddock story. He says, one of the best sermons I heard from one of my students was by a young woman who didn't have a church, no place to preach. So she went over to Wesley Woods, little place there for elderly people, 3 levels of care, you know the places, and they let her have a Sunday afternoon service once a month in the sunroom. People would wheel down there and listen to her. She was a sprightly young woman, and she said to me, would you come and hear me preach and evaluate my preaching? I want to be a good preacher, and I don't have a church. I said, okay, and I went one Sunday afternoon. She read her text from Luke 18, the mothers bringing the babies to Jesus. Permit the little children to come to me. I said, great day in the morning. Of all the texts to read here, the average age is 117, and she bring the little children? This is what she did. She said, I still can't get over the fact that Jesus' helpers, the 12 apostles, ministers, and clergy said, get the children out of here. In a way, I can understand this. I mean, after all, they make noise. They have to be cared for. Sometimes you have to get up and leave with them. They take everybody else's time. Besides that, they don't give anything. They can't teach a class. They can't sing in the choir. They're just, they're a burden. I understand that. She went through all that. But Jesus said, leave them alone. Let them come. That's kingdom people. And those old people just nodded. That's right. That's right. She never mentioned elderly people. They just perceived. It's marvelous. We have a tendency to forget sometimes that many of us, if we don't have a Jewish background, we're not always included in the covenant. But God opened the door for us to be included as well, as we now open it for others. Jesus said, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And this is what Paul writes in Ephesians 1. In him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to a plan of him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will, in order that we, who were the first to put our hope in Christ, might be for the praise of his glory. And you also were included in Christ when you heard the message of truth, the gospel of your salvation. When you believed, you were marked in him with the seal, the promised Holy Spirit, who is a deposit guaranteeing our inheritance until the redemption of those who are in God's possession, to the praise of his glory. We've got to kind of ask ourselves, what does it take to be included, and what does it really kind of look like to include other people? And if you're here today, you probably don't need much of an apologetic as to why we need to be inclusive in our worship. But the reality is, many in society have forgotten these people. And really, the church has a poor track record of inclusion in this way. And it was actually reading Barbara Newman's book, Accessible Gospel Inclusive Worship, that allowed me to understand about disciplines that are centered on upward praise, dealing with difficult concepts like lament, and how we can ask those questions in meaningful and realistic ways with people of disabilities, but also with children. I think it's interesting that that Luke 18 text says, permit the little children. Some translation have suffer the little children, and it's something we need to understand that there is some work to be done. And so, what do we use as an example? I would consider baptism to be a great model for us. So why do we do baptism? It's basically the inclusion of this premise that they are adopted into the kingdom of God, into the covenant, and we celebrate that as a sign and seal in baptism. And one of the seals of baptism is inclusion in the church. If you go to the worship source book, you'll find that there under the baptism section. And so, what do we actually base it on? Well, we base it on the concept of circumcision as rights to enter the covenant. And so, when we think about covenant people and the inclusion of people, we can look to something like baptism as something that, as Reformed people, we celebrate as a great opportunity to include people in the church and in the church life. But we have to consider what we do with our children, and those with special needs. So isn't it interesting that our language gets a little muddled sometimes? So anyone ever heard this? A church say the kids are now dismissed to Sunday school, if it's a mid-service Sunday school. And come on, language, people. So I've made an effort whenever I have an opportunity to lead that portion of the service where the children are going out. I try to use words like we welcome them to Sunday school, or welcome them to, we call it jam time, to spend time with Jesus, and to learn more about God's word in that way. So it's interesting the language that we use. We have complaints about noise. We have complaints about smell, because there are many churches now that are putting in scent-free rooms or scent-free policies. We have nursing rooms, or what some churches call a cry room. And if you lead with individuals who have special needs, you have to be prepared, certainly, for any sort of interruption that you may not anticipate. And so I'll tell you the story of Riker. Riker is on the autism spectrum in our church, and he's age 6, almost 7. And Riker, he knows me as his buddy. I'm not Pastor Josh. And one day I'm looking up. We'd just done a call to worship. We just finished a song. I'm about to do God's greeting, and there's Riker standing beside me. He must have broken away from mom and dad. And so I sat down on the stairs beside him, and taught him about raising his hands, and used the opportunity to explain the blessing to Riker, and really to the whole church, why we do what we do, why we say what we say. And the two of us together, we did the blessing. And what do you think? What do you think would have happened? Well, there were some people, like his parents, who really celebrated that. But we also had letters go to council. As you can imagine, some people were not so fond of a 7-year-old who was doing the blessing. But I'm going to talk about our service on Thursdays, and this is a very pointed service. It is directed absolutely at those with special needs, and so in some ways it does not speak to what is inclusive. And so I want to acknowledge that right off the top, that it's not talking about getting those with special needs involved necessarily on Sunday morning. But I think what you'll discover is that there are many aspects of what's happening on Thursdays, and what I've learned from that will allow you to increase your comfort level and the comfort level of those in your church, in including those who have special needs or disabilities in any way. So let me tell you first the origin story of Thursdays. So Thursdays happened because someone from our church is a programmer for the local support center. It's called Michener here in Red Deer, where they support those with special needs. And he's a program director. And on Sundays, they were having a Sunday service that was led by a pastor who was retired, and now he was going to retire from being retired. and so they were going to lose their Sunday morning service. They had about 5 to 10 in attendance most Sunday mornings, and because it was difficult to get people to be a part of that service and to lead others in that because they had their own churches, those people who would dedicate time on Sunday mornings were usually church-going people themselves. And so that led to having Thursday as being a good opportune day to create a church service kind of midweek. And so we said, well, let's just try it and see what happens. So every Thursday, basically every Thursday, besides times when I have vacation or when they have special programming, we have these folks meet with us. We don't have a name for it. We've talked about calling it certain things like the Bridge, and that was a previous name for the Sunday service. But after almost 2 years, we started asking ourselves, well, do we need one? And I actually like that we don't have a name for it. Frankly, I like that we just call it church. It's kind of interesting that way, that we know it to be church, and actually we have a very regular and almost regimented sort of a liturgy. It's very recognizable, and it's very consistent with liturgies that you would incur on Sunday morning, that you would encounter these almost in most CRC churches. So that consistency allows us to do certain things. And so first off, we have 3 prayers, and again, this is where I'm indebted to Barb Newman and those who worked on her book in regards to creating simple language for these things. So we have a thank you prayer, a sorry prayer, and a please prayer. Our thank you prayer is at the beginning of service typically, and it's thanks in response to all the things that God has done and the day that we have. We have a sorry prayer, which is in response to confession, and we have a please prayer, which is our congregational prayer, where we take requests and go from there. We use a lot of songs. We do a ton of singing, and most of them are known songs. We introduce the songs. We have a song book with about 25 songs. And so, try and get people on the same page, and those are all distributed by, we have 3 guys who play the role of usher almost every week, and they make sure that people get books, and we introduce new songs, but it's rather infrequent. And then we have short messages. So just to kind of give you a very kind of general overview of what Thursday looks like, this is what a typical Thursday would be. We open with greetings, and I now have my friend Wayne, who, whenever he's there, he wants to help me with the greetings, so he comes up and stands beside me, and we do the same thing every week. It's grace, mercy, and peace be to you all in the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we've got kind of actions that we do with our hands for that as well. But we start with greetings to those around us. We turn to one side and say hi. We turn to the other side and say hello. And then we look for anyone who might be visiting for the first time. And many times it's staff people that are visiting for the first time, but we celebrate them, and we thank them for coming, and so that's part of it. And then we enter into a time of praise, like you'd notice in your typical Sunday morning service. We have the thank you prayer, and sometimes we have a song of thanksgiving with count your blessings after that. And then almost every week, it seems like someone walks in the door, and before service even starts, and someone will say to me, like Pat will always come and say, "Josh, can you pray for me?" It's like, "Well, what's up, Pat?" And she said, "Well, I said some bad words yesterday, and I don't want to say any bad words anymore." And so I have call to confessions given to me as people come through the door. So most come rather naturally. And then we do a sorry prayer. It's an opportunity for us to talk about why we say sorry, and why we say sorry to God, and how He listens and forgives us. And sometimes we'll do Jesus Loves Me as a song in response to the sorry prayer, as kind of a song of assurance. And then we'll go into a message. We usually have some form of object lesson in the message, and a song that ties to that in some way, shape, or form. And then after that, we go into joyful noise time. So in response to our message, we pass out instruments, and everyone gets an instrument. And we need two things. One is the instrument, and the other is our joy face, which we say, if you've got the joy, 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 joy down in your heart, you better tell your face something about it. And so we practice our joy face, which is a huge smile, and we do a few more songs. Then we collect our prayer requests and do our please prayer, and then we end every service with "He's got the whole world in his hands." So that's a typical format. And so just kind of talking through some of the results here. It started with 10 or 15 people. Now we have between 50 and 70. We'll have an average of 15 or 18 wheelchairs on any given Thursday. 100 on a good day. We now have a bus that when it's not the summer, they collect people from all over the city. And it will almost get as many on a long weekend in our church service, in a regular Sunday morning service, as we do on Thursdays throughout the regular year. So we have never advertised, and almost everything is word of mouth. And what's interesting is that most scenarios are one-to-one care, and now many of the prayer requests are coming from staff members. And as a result, those people are hearing a simplified gospel message. And so it's led to me being able to provide marriage counseling. I've done pastoral visits to people in their home, helped to get a spouse of one of our support staff into a treatment center for his alcoholism. And I've done a wedding, and I even was called to do a funeral for one of the people that we care for on Thursday afternoons as part of that congregation. And so it's been very interesting to see some of these things become shaped, but there are challenges. The first one I'd say is getting your church to buy into it. They see it as a midweek service, middle of the day, and they can't create time or space to be a part of that. And so it's kind of tough, but I've been looking at trying to encourage more of the elderly people in our church to be a part, those people who may have time middle of the day. And so I've got an 85-year-old who plays violin every week, but we've only ever had one elder come to visit the church on Thursdays. And we've had a couple of deacons who've come out. Some other people in the church. I've had people, go up in the balcony and take pictures because they just can't believe it, that we have this many people coming out on Thursday. But I would say it is a little difficult to get the church to buy in. If you are someone who cannot go with the flow and talk off the cuff or deal with interruptions, your plans will be interrupted. And when you create space to include other people in, even if it's a church service on Sunday morning, whether it's someone who's maybe just seeking, who doesn't have special needs, or those who have special needs, like a Riker who comes up in the middle of the church service, you may have people just blurt something out in the middle, or someone who has a physical handicap who has a tough time with the noise or something like that. I've had my daughter, 10 years old, with me, and she talked about, why is that person moaning throughout the whole service? And it's an opportunity to kind of talk about that. So, and I think one of the things that I see those interruptions as a blessing. So I'll have someone interrupt what's supposed to be our confession time, and someone say, "Well, Josh, I've got a story." Oh, well, okay. Well, Rose, what's your story? And we talk with that person. We give them that opportunity, and we give that to both clients and the support staff. So now the support staff is starting to really recognize that they also have a chance and a voice. And so many of them are immigrants from other countries, and they also feel like they have a difficult time communicating sometimes. And so this gives them a chance to be heard as well, because they know that I'll give them the patience that they require to get their thoughts out of their head. I also want to say that one of the challenges is in becoming trained to know what to do. So some of it is training the staff and training them as to, okay, so this is what a church service kind of looks like when you plan worship. But you have to create opportunities for the staff to train you as well. So I had interactions with a gentleman. His name was Roland. Roland liked to bring his harmonica, and Roland was always excitable. Roland's about 65, but if he's 100 pounds, I'd be amazed. But very, very joy-filled man, and he always wanted to play his harmonica. And so I'd be playing the piano or guitar or something, and I'd invite him to come up and stand beside me. And it was Becky, one of the support workers, who came to me and said, Josh, can we kind of make sure that Roland is only able to come up, maybe for that later time, and let's have a chair for him, because I'm just worried with some of the cables and all that stuff that's connected at the front that he's going to have a fall, and that won't be good. And so I see there have been opportunities for me to learn from the staff, let them train me about things that are going on. I just want to talk about the replication, trying to do this in your own church. So the first thing I'd say is just start doing it. Thursday service will help create opportunities for you to have more people than you could accommodate on Sunday morning. And then you could start creating bridges to understanding, how do I bridge this between Friendship Ministries? How do I bridge this to Sunday morning service? And so something like a midweek service allows you to do that. But consider what times would work with those in your community, and you'd have to reach out to some people there. And then don't be discouraged. You will have people, naysayers and doubters, and people who complain, but be ready to give an answer. And that's why I kind of started with an apologetic, saying that, we need to show our love to these people, because these people are kingdom people too. And, as much as we were once on the outside of a locked door, banging on the door, looking to come in. We were Ethiopian eunuchs, who found themselves outside of the church. But now all of a sudden, even we as baptized members are able to be a part. So just be ready to give your answer for those people, and be prepared to basically minister alone. It is tough to get leadership on board with something like this unless they see it. And when they see it, they'll want to be a part of it. And I think this speaks to what ministry is looking like nowadays, kind of in general, that basically ministry today is something where we can't just build tent meetings and invite the community to come, and they're going to come, and we're going to see people's lives changed as they dedicate them to Christ. No, people don't do that anymore, and program-based church is really not working. But instead, when you develop something like what we've done on Thursdays in our church service, these staff people are starting to see that, why are they doing this? They're not getting paid. They're not getting anything extra. It's a whole bunch of extra work. Why do they do this? And then they start to realize this church actually must care about people. And when that starts to happen, when people don't start second guessing your motives or intentions, and instead are able to really just look at what it is that you're actually doing, and understanding that you're doing it because you are so loved that you've got love to spare, then I think people will want to be a part of it. And basically, one of the last things I want to talk about is just what's been the impact on me. So these are three things that have happened for me. And I think it's really important that you understand that there's no selfless act. And this is absolutely something for me that has impacted my ministry, my ability to interact and support everyone in our church, and to be much more inclusive with my language that I use on Sunday morning, what versions of the Bible I may speak from. But I just want to talk about this, that I changed my day off at the church from Monday to Friday. And the reason I did that is that there aren't too many Thursday afternoon or evening meetings after my Thursday service. And so I end my week on the Thursday service because it's so uplifting to me that I have an opportunity to just based in that for the next day. It actually has increased my ability to rest, increased my ability to take some time to be a better pastor, a better father, a better husband. It's increased my sensitivities to love people, to be just a general better leader. And yeah, that's number two. I've increased my personal sensitivity. Um, that so just a short story. I was in a church this past weekend where the elder was giving the congregational prayer based on some requests that he had asked for from the congregation. And one of the prayer requests was for a 2-year-old child who had just been diagnosed with cancer. And in the middle of the prayer, he started to break down. And I'm sitting in the front row having just preached. And I thought to myself, I need to go and encourage him. And so I went and stood beside him and just put my arm around him. And I kind of asked him, I nodded to him and he nodded to me. And so I continued with his prayer. And then we prayed for him within the prayer and prayed for the other families who are impacted by this. And then I feel like all of that has come because I've got an increased personal sensitivity to the needs of all people and an ability to respond to things as they come. And the other thing that I want to say is that I've included my family. And at Christmas, we had Milk and Cookies Day with our Thursday church group, where we had a photo booth and all this stuff with some funny Christmas hats. And we had a number of people, including family, out to that. And all of my family was there, including my 4 kids and my wife. And I'm going to tear up. I was so proud of how my little kids, my 3-year-old son and my 4-year-old daughter at the time, were able to show genuine love to people in wheelchairs, and they taught me that that the sensitivity that is required to include people in worship is innate to us. That it's actually learned behavior for us not to be inclusive, and so to see that in my kids, to see my 11-year-old show desire over the course of the summer to come to our Thursday services as well, because she wants to sing something, and yeah, it's been an absolute blessing. But I hope that it has been a blessing for you as well to just kind of listen to some of this testimony and be encouraged that that God wants to use you to include people in worship, whatever that means in your context. And if this has been helpful, I'm so thankful. But at this time, if there are any questions, I'm going to pass it back to Diane.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Josh. I think we all would love to attend a Thursday service, actually, in your church. It would be a real privilege and honor to be a part of that, actually. What a great vision you've given us, and also just to acknowledge that it's not easy. You were honest about that sometimes you feel like you're going alone or getting started might be difficult, but we really appreciate that honesty as well as seeing your heart there, especially come out at the end. I would like to invite people that are listening live to type some questions into the Q&A or the chat box, either one, and Josh will address them right now. I would like to start with just a couple of questions actually that I have for you, Josh, as we go here. Wondering how many people does this take? You talked about the volunteers that help you and minister with you there. I mean, now you have a rather large group of 50 to 70 people, but how many people does that involve as far as assisting and help and to get that going? Sure.
Well, I just want to put this up. This is our that of all of our different songs that's put together. This is actually done by completely by the Michener group, the volunteers that work there, because there are, as you can imagine, there are Christians within that organization that support these people. It takes a very, very specific type of person to be able to do that job in and day out, and many of them are people of faith. And so I think of people like Emily and Shannon and Jeanette. They are genuine leaders within that community. And so you have to work with the support staff. And one of the best ways that you can do that is right now we're going through on Thursday afternoons loving God and loving each other, and talking about how we do that. And we talked about one of the ways we love each other is that we pray for each other. And so we have had times of prayer every week, and every single week, if I don't bring it up, 95% of the time it's brought up by a client that they want to pray for the staff, the support staff, the rec staff, the in-house staff, for all the staff that are there. Sometimes it's specific. Miss Mary will stand up and say, I want to pray for Christine, who's sitting beside me, and I want to pray for Rose, who's sitting there. And they also do want to pray for the staff because they appreciate them. And you need to rely upon those people and their gifts because they know so much more about the day in and day out work of interacting with those people. So that would be the first place I start. I've had 2 other pastors come in to do the message portion. But because I'm a musician as well as a trained preacher as well, it is something where a lot can fall on one person. But having the ties with friendship taking a break during the summer, I've been able to get 2 or 3 of the people who friendship to come and do the message portion, and I'll still do the music. And then in the music side of things, I've had 3 people in our church for this size of group be involved in helping to lead the worship. It's very rare, though, I will say, for the church service to happen when I'm not there. So you feel a little bit like a linchpin, but there's a good core group of, I'd say, at least 10, 12 people that help out to make this happen.
All right. At one point you said something about immigrants from other countries. And could you say more about that?
Sure. So actually, we have a lot of temporary foreign workers in our part of the world here in Red Deer. And actually, many of them find themselves from places like the Philippines or from East Asia. And so some of these people are having a difficult time finding themselves located within the community of Red Deer and pour themselves into their work. And so they come, they're a part of this, and then all of a sudden they discover something like this Thursday service. And because I have demonstrated some sensitivities and learned these sensitivities with the people that they support, they, as people who also have special needs that are not based on a physical or mental disability, but rather just based on their cultural differences, they also feel able to open up about their life, their spiritual difficulties, and some of the questions that they have in regards to faith. So I feel like demonstrating the comfortability, the inclusivity of those with special needs has allowed these other individuals who are immigrants from other parts of the world to feel like it is a safe place to open up, and he will take the time to listen to what I have to say, even if it's difficult for me to get across.
Interesting, very interesting, because the barrier there is the language and the culture. Yeah, okay, great. I do have a few more questions. I would still like to encourage people to type in their questions, and maybe they don't have any, but you could otherwise in the chat portion there just say hi to the group if you want to, if you're on the call, or you can just continue to listen. That's all right too. You talked about the noise level, and I think this is something that is something that we would struggle with in a regular worship service too, or in your Sunday morning worship service. Could you address that a little bit more of how to be accepting of extra noise? I mean, just the noise that's going to happen from people who that's just part of their life, style and the part of who they are when they come into a place.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We have nursery in many churches. Like our church still has nursery for kids up to age 3, and within about 15 or 20 minutes into our service, and I'm not saying this should be normative, is that we welcome our kids to go to jam time. And in the summer, we still run a children's program. And so that means, from basically up until grade 1, there's no children in our church service. And I think many people are used to that because it gives them the opportunity to have a focused time on the message. I think that the one of the best ways to teach people about worship and inclusivity in worship has been something that we've started doing in our church, which is we take our typical service and all the elements of that service, call to confession, assurance of pardon, time of friendship. We have all of those things listed, and then we have another name for them that will be understandable to children. And then we explain why we do them. And so now we've been taking each of these elements and basically using those elements in our church service as a way to do a kid's message. So for instance, we did God's greeting. So we explained that this is basically like God saying hi, and saying hi and welcome. We want to do that with each other too. So that's why we have the time of friendship. And then the call to worship is like God's alarm clock for us. It's, time to wake up and pay attention as to what's going on. And so we included the kids in that. But in that time, not only are you teaching the children, but you're teaching everyone else in the congregation. I think through children's messages would be one of the greatest opportunities, because the children will do a better job of demonstrating the willingness to abide any of those interruptions, and they will be more inclusive naturally than we in the church who have learned that church is traditional and you sit in your pew, and so when it comes to the noise and the interruptions that happen, I think I think that's where it's going to really start to flourish.
Great. Elizabeth has sent a question. She says, I was curious about your comment that it is learned behavior to be non-inclusive.
Sure, and
elaborate on that idea?
Yeah, I should be a little careful because in no way I'm a social psychologist or anything like this. That's not my training. That's not my background. I would say it's more just on observation that that what I see in my children and other children's ability to be accepting of people of other cultures, of other races, people who are different than themselves. Our children, I think, naturally will include any of those people without really second guessing as to why. I lived in southern Tennessee for 5 or 6 years, and I discovered racism was tremendously rampant. But there were times when that racism was not really evident in children until you started to see it, when they became much more vocal, and learning individuals at the age of 8 or 10. But that, things like racism, I think, become, learned prejudices. And, I think our children probably do a natural job of being naturally inclusive. And so do I have anything to back that up? No, other than my own personal observation. So I hope that's helpful. But if you do happen to have something that says, that goes along with that, or even that challenges the idea, I'd be happy to look at it and read it.
Great question. Thank you for that one, Elizabeth. Do you have any ideas, Josh, or this is kind of putting you on the spot, but helpful tips on how we can help our congregations, how we as pastors or worship leaders can help our congregations unlearn those behaviors that have kind of come into our lives about being non-inclusive, about how being used to our own cultures and our own worship styles, those kind of things. How can we maybe perhaps unlearn some of those non-inclusive ideas or habits that we've picked up?
I think part of it is just recognizing what it has been like to be excluded ourselves. If you start in Acts chapter 2, basically the entire book of Acts, actually, what you'll start to see is that we were outside of this church, the people of God that we discover in the Old Testament, until Acts 2 kind of comes around. And if even you see a picture of all the different places, Parthians, Medes, Elamites, dwellers of Mesopotamia, Cappadocia, Asia, Phrygia, all these different places where people came from, it's almost a complete circle around Jerusalem where these people came from. No, those were all God-fearing Jewish people who had been converted. But what was happening at that moment is that God was making a change in the inclusivity of the church to include other people, not just God-fearing Jews. But Peter spoke to not only those people who were gathered, but to everyone who was in Jerusalem who could hear. It was the cab drivers who took people from Cappadocia, to be included in the celebration at that time. And so when we take a look at how God builds a church in Acts 2, one of the things that we see there is inclusivity. I mentioned also the Ethiopian eunuch. Well, talk about someone who is certainly on the outside of the church walls, but what do we hear from him? He says he had been up to Jerusalem to worship. Well, how in the world would someone who is a visible minority, as an Ethiopian, certainly, but also a eunuch who, I think is Isaiah, who talks about, the eunuch who has been cut off and will not have children, has no place in worship. How in the world does this person come up to that place to worship? They're climbing the walls of the temple. They're peering in through the windows because they want to be a part. And when we start to recognize how God, through the book of Acts, through the early church, has done a job to include other people, and that we ourselves, though we see ourselves included because of our covenantal view, we were excluded at some point ourselves. So when we start to view ourselves as outsiders first, who have been included in something special, I think it's a little bit easier for us to engage the idea of including those people and abiding some of those people. I think it's Fred Craddock who talks about, new people coming to the church who don't know a benediction from an introit and holding their bulletins all upside down and stuff like this. But I don't think church should be a place where we hand out keys to the membership and make sure the doors are locked on Sunday. And it's got to be a place where we've got to abide people who really are there to try and get some questions answered. And I think that when you strive to answer some of those questions, you'll realize you have some of those questions too. It also, I think, children is a good place to start too. If you as a pastor want to start diving into some of these difficult topics and concepts, starting with children's messages and starting with very, very simple ways of talking about inclusivity and how we were on the outside, now are on the inside. I think that's a good way that people will accept it because of the simplicity of the message.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for clarifying that. I do have another question about the Thursdays service that you have, and with 50 to 70 people, and the noise level again, and you smile. But now, practically speaking, some people with disabilities have a hard time with noise, like it's too much. So how do you balance that with being able to communicate clearly? So obviously you're amplifying your sound in some way, and yet acknowledging that for some people the noise is they're hypersensitive to that. It's just
Sure.
Too much.
Yeah, and I usually, again, rely upon the ability of the support staff to know how to navigate those situations. There are times when I've gone over to someone who does have an auditory sensitivity and just held their hand while I continue on in the service. And just in that moment, there's a calm that can come. And sometimes the staff recognizes that there's an opportunity to take that person and move through the sanctuary. Our sanctuary is large enough, and that we accommodate about 300, I'd say. So, to even have 70 people, most of them are in the front, 8 or 10 rows. But the wheelchairs can kind of congest some of the aisles in the front area. I typically use a piano and a head microphone, and so I can usually contain a room. But again, I think it's more important to acknowledge and interact with the interruptions, because I'd say the average mental age of those who gather on Thursdays is about 4 or 5 years old. And so you'll get people like Rose who just want to stand up and talk for a sec. And so I'll just say, to my friends, hey, wait a second, I'll turn off my microphone and we'll have a 2-minute conversation in the middle of the service. And everyone's completely fine with it, because they know that if they ever have something to talk about, that they can have 2 minutes too. And I think, you have to throw some of your plans out the window that way, and be ready for anything. But I feel like at some point you kind of forget that sort of stuff is happening. Yeah, there's been times during prayers where we'll have someone with with like a vocal repetitious glitch who will just moan or cry out, and you give it a second in the prayer, and then you keep going, and then you give it a second if it happens again, and keep going. And I think that a lot of those who gather, especially if it's a special needs service, those people are accepting of it because they hear it all the time in some of the other programs that they're a part of. So it's not a surprise to them; it's more a surprise to you as the leader. And yeah, it would be a surprise to your church too. But I think if you talk about it instead of trying to ignore it, it would go a lot better on Sunday.
Ah, yes, good. Now you've said that it's a little bit hard, or maybe it was hard just initially to get your church's buy-in. This Thursday service happens in your church sanctuary, correct?
Yep.
That's what you just said.
Yep.
So how much crossover is there that people from the members of the congregation do actually attend or help on Thursday, or vice versa, that the Thursday people now attend the Sunday services?
Sure. So it's actually, I think we've had one or two of the clients attend Sunday mornings. And again, the difficulty is finding people who are willing to take their take their client at a time when they are scheduled to church. If they're a church-going person, they're going to likely bring that person to their own church as opposed to bringing them to our church. It's actually been more of the support staff who have started coming to our church. And so, yeah, we've had, I talked about that, the couple who I did a pastoral visit, and we got him into an alcohol recovery program, and they've been attending our church. So there have been other people that come on Sunday mornings. I did the funeral for Bradley, and the support worker who worked with Bradley for 25 years has attended several services as well. I've heard other people who more say that they've started attending church somewhere, and so that's an increased kind of testimony. And so, we're not there to steal sheep or anything like this. So we're happy to hear that people are going to church somewhere. And the biggest thing that I'll say, though, is that the testimony that I get from the support staff is that since Thursday services, the culture of the support staff has changed. That there is an increased sensitivity for demonstrating love and care for each other. They said that actually, you'd have some people, a handful of people, that would still, their cursing or their language. They've been a lot more sensitive about their use of language, and because they recognize that it's within earshot of several people who attend on Thursdays, including the clients they support. So yeah, they've said there's an actual cultural change that's happened within the support staff. So I'd say that's where you see a lot of them. More of the pragmatics of them coming on Sunday morning. But there have been some, but it's just few and far between. It won't be consistent unless you get your church to say, now that we have this, what are we going to do to continue to support it? And, and that visioning hasn't happened here in Red Deer yet. So that's, it is what it is. And yeah, getting the leadership to buy in has been really, really challenging. But anyone has seen it has supported it, to the point where now they just added it to my job description. So they've said, this is something we want you to keep doing this. And so now that I have that in there, it's a little bit easier to kind of push back and say, okay, so no, this is the kind of help I need. But all that being said, I still don't have the service on Thursday as an official service, as recognized by our church. It is an official ministry, but I've been asking softly if we could start considering calling this an official church service, which would mean, yeah, the attendance of elders to oversee the worship and stuff like that would be much more mandatory. So, because we've been talking about what does communion look like in that community. That's we've talked about creating serve or offering projects that we could collect offerings for World Renew, like they have the catalog of buying chickens or buying goats or bicycles, and that there are people within the support staff who have said, I think it'd be good to be able to help these people worship that way too. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks for the honesty that you've shown us, and for the process, that you're a part of. I think maybe that's encouraging to people too, to see that it doesn't happen overnight, and automatically everybody doesn't just jump on board with you and say, yay, this is wonderful. But it's also encouraging to see that that you continue to pursue it. That it's a valuable ministry, and I really didn't mean with that question that the goal was, for those people to attend on Sunday or for your Sunday people to attend on Thursday. That's not the goal at all. Both services are totally valid and incredibly important ministries on their own. So, that's great. I would love to encourage people to ask one more question or two if they have any. And otherwise, Josh, if you want to just wrap this up and show us or tell us a little bit about what you've learned. I know you had two resources that you used, Accessible Gospel, and I think you had mentioned one other. So if you just want to mention those a minute, and then we'll take any last question that comes in and we'll wrap it up after that.
Yeah, so this Barb Newman's book, Accessible Gospel, Inclusive Worship, and there's some excellent resources that are actually included in the book. And I'd say that one of the things that that many churches could do to increase their sensitivity is to look at the appendices that are here. And some of these are they're talking about the vertical worshiping habits. And some of them are just being able to talk about how praise can be reiterated as I love you, how confession can be reiterated as I'm sorry. Lament is asking God why. Illumination is making the statement, I'm listening. And so it's wonderful. And actually, I think it's on the worship website that you'll find some of this stuff. There's a showcase, Vertical Habits, Worship, and Our Faith Vocabulary. So there's a link at worship.calvin.edu under resource library. So take a look for this one as well. I think this is available through Faith Alive, Joyce, but I think Joyce or Diane would be able to better answer that question. And the Craddock story that I read was from Craddock Stories by Fred Craddock. It's a collection of his stories, and if you don't know who Fred Craddock is, go to YouTube and you'll find yourself, with about 5 or 6 really good sermons that that will really help to lift you up. And actually, some of the points I talked about today. And so the title for this talk is "Can I Be Included?" There's a Fred Craddock sermon called "Can I Also Be Included?" I think is what it's called on YouTube. Check that one out because he talks even more about this Acts 2 connection, the Ethiopian eunuch connection. So that's an excellent resource. And then I think I already showed our service book, but just to highlight what that kind of looks like a little bit. We usually have a picture that goes along with the lyrics to whatever song we're dealing with. We've pared down, a lot of the lyrics, and just try to make it, visual and intriguing as well. If anyone's interested in more about that, I have posted my email address within the chat as well. But you can contact me at pastorjoshfriend@gmail.com. And you can also see, I think there's a little bit about this on my website, pastorjoshfriend.com. But if there's any way that I can help support or pray for a ministry that others are looking to start, then please reach out. I'd be interested in hearing about it.
All right, thanks so much, Josh. And for those of you who are going to be watching the recording and can't see the chat box, Josh's last name, Friend, is exactly like it sounds, like being a friend to another person. So it's pastorjoshfriend@gmail.com. If you'd like to contact him by email, he's graciously offered to assist or to communicate with you that way too. So thank you so much. I will wrap us up here today. I'll try to share my screen. I understand at the beginning I was sharing a little bit too much of my screen, so we'll see if we can get this to actually work now again. But I think we have it now. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. We will be posting this recording of this webinar on our website. You can see that it's worship@crcna.org. Oh, that's the welcome to the webinar. And so let's try this one. This is the closing one, and resume slideshow. Well, let's see, that's probably not going to work. But anyway, we will be posting this webinar on our worship website page, and we will also be sending you an email, all of you who have signed up for this, that when that is live. Give us about a week or so to get that up there. And then feel free, of course, to email Josh, or you can email any of us at worship@crcna.org with your questions as well. I will include in the post of the recorded webinar the resources that Josh mentioned and where you can get those books or resources as well. So thank you for joining us today. Blessings to all of you in your worship. We will have more webinars scheduled starting September, so watch for those on the website. Thanks, and blessings to you as you all worship. Goodbye.
Thanks, Sam.